Hello, everyone. Last night I held my monthly meet with the mayor following Representative John Curtis's town hall. I did not record it, but I would like to just review with you the presentation that we went over to give you an idea of what we talked about. So, with that in mind, let me just start and bring the presentation up, and I'll walk through that with. So here we go. This is the presentation from the Meet with the Mayor meeting that I held last night. There were a few people in the presentation. Good news is most of the candidates running for city council was there, so I think that's a credit to them. That would be Colby Gibson, Kathy Harding, Sarah Peterson, and Kurt Ostler. He's running to be my replacement, and he's running unopposed. So he will be our next mayor, and I appreciate him coming. We get along, and I'm excited to have him be our new mayor because I think he will do a great job. Anyway, there were two things I wanted to talk about. One of them was traffic. Traffic issues come up from time to time, especially when new developments come in. There's always a concern that the new homes are going to generate traffic that overwhelms our roads and creates unsafe condition for our kids. And let me just go through some of the terms that we use when we talk about traffic. We use the term trip counts a lot, and that is one car traveling in one direction on a segment of road. It's called one trip. An average home produces about 10 trips a day. It can be anywhere between 7 and 12 on average. But if you want to just do a rough number to say how's it going to impact where I live, if there's only one exit, then if there are 10 homes that are produced, that are created, and you could expect about 100 trips a day to be on the road that exits the area where those new homes are. That is really a small number of trips if you think about it. Most traffic runs between 6 a.m. and midnight. And so that is over the course of 18 hours, 100 trips means you've got on average, I'm really bad at math. Thank you, calculator. So let me just use my phone to supplement my poor skills in the area of calculation. 100 divided by 18, and it's a little over 5. So 5.5 trips an hour. That means once every 10 minutes, you're going to have a car drive by your house. I don't know that you'd even notice that. So that you just think about impact in terms of how many times a car would drive by your home in an hour. And it's 100 trips a day might sound intimidating, but you think of it in terms of over the course of 18 hours, what does that mean? Less than one every 10 minutes is not anything that you would probably even notice. Another term that's used is the 85th percentile speed. That is the speed at which 85% of the cars are traveling at the speed limit or at that speed or below. Traffic engineers like to use that as a general rule for what speed limit should be set because they found that people use the road conditions, how the road feels, the width of a road, how many, is it curvy, is it not, as a determining factor in how fast they go, as They use that way more than looking at a speed limit sign. You might even validate that in your own driving. If you don't know what the speed limit is, how fast are you traveling? And it probably has more to do with what you think is the right speed than what sign might be posted. Hopefully they're in accordance, because when you have a wide disparity in the speeds being traveled on a road, there actually are more accidents. Here's some visual factors that I listed that can affect your perception of how fast you should go: the lane and shoulder configurations, the presence of vertical or horizontal curves, sight distance and obstructions, presence of surrounding developments to the street. That would be homes with driveways on the street. And then access management characteristics. Is there a median, a turn lane, etc.? Those are things that impact how people travel more so than setting speed limits. Another thing that we talk about when we talk about roads, we talk about local. We'll say collector. Sometimes we'll say local collector versus collector. And you have a category arterial versus, and then you can subcategorize those into minor and major arterials. In Highland, we have a lot of local roads. Those are the roads that are typically by your home. If you're like in a cul-de-sac or in a road that really doesn't go anywhere except other homes, then that's probably a local road. They tend to be a little bit narrower. Often the trips on those roads are about a quarter mile or less in length. And the average annual daily trip count on that is going to be probably 1,500 or less. There are different ways that people talk about local roads. That's one. There's kind of another rule of thumb that says about 1,000 trips a day is what a local road can handle, but they can actually physically handle more than that. And I think the less than 1,500 is a better number, but these again are generalized rules. If you have a collector road, that's where what a local collector, think of it as up in Beacon Hills, you have Beacon Hills Boulevard that goes north and kind of winds through the area, and it turns into Twin Bridges and Lighthouse. I would consider Beacon Hills Boulevard to be a local collector, because as it heads north, there are side streets that feed it, and then it heads north from 11800 north, and that I would probably refer to as a collector. So local collectors, you're going to get 2,500 to 5,000 trips a day. The trip on that road is going to be half mile or less. A collector, like 11,800, your trip length is going to be a mile or less. Minor arterial versus major arterial. Major arterial would be SR 92, North County Boulevard. Could be considered one. SR 92 on different parts of it gets up to 25,000 trips a day. North County Boulevard and Alpine Highway are getting about 15,000 trips a day. And the interesting thing for North County Boulevard, Alpine Highway, and SR 92, those are actually state roads and are managed by the state and are maintained by the state. So while they go through Highland, we really don't even have to pay for them, because the UDOT covers that. Let's look at some traffic issues. So let's look at the impact of changing a speed limit. This is anecdotal in a way because we only have one, but it's consistent with the theory that a speed limit sign has less to do with how fast you travel than the road itself. So on Canal Boulevard on the west side of Alpine Highway, if you go in about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile, We tracked speed in that area in 2019, in May through June of 2019, and the average speed on the road at the time was 35.4 miles per hour. Fast forward 2 years, May of 2021, we had just reduced the speed limit down to 30 miles an hour on that same stretch of road, the exact same location. And the average speed was 36 miles an hour. So it went up slightly. So in essence, changing the speed limit had no impact. If you look at the 85th percentile on the road, it is 41 miles an hour in 2021. I don't have that data for 2019. So that's an anecdotal evidence of the traffic engineer's assumption or presumption that speed limit signs don't necessarily impact what speed people actually travel. If you, I do a heat map chart on when we do a speed analysis. I break it into 4 quadrants: midnight to 6 to noon, noon to 6 p.m., and 6 p.m. to midnight, and I do different colors for the percentage of the traffic that is 5 miles an hour over the speed limit or less, 5 to 10 over, and greater than 10 over. And you can see in 2019 the chart looked pretty reasonable. That is not a bad, comparatively speaking, report for a road. But as we changed the limit, and all we did is increase the number of people that are violating the law. We really didn't have a behavior change on how fast people travel. Now here's something that's just interesting. We just a couple weeks ago completed doing some traffic counts on Canal Boulevard, the new section that was just completed the middle of May. We did it in 2 locations, one about a block west of North County Boulevard, and then at the bottom of the hill. If you've traveled that road, it goes down to the American Fork Riverbed and then comes up again, and then is flat out to North County Boulevard. So at the bottom of the hill, that's the chart on your right over here. You can see that the average speed is 39.3 miles an hour, and the 85th percentile is 45 miles an hour. So that's the bottom of the hill. I would expect traffic to be going faster than normal there. And at the top of the hill, where it's flat, the average speed was 36.6, and the 85th percentile was 41. If we look at that in terms of what percentage of traffic is traveling at 5 miles an hour above the speed limit or less, we're looking at, depending on the time of day, 25% or less of the traffic is actually within range of the speed limit. Everybody else is speeding. We'll measure that a couple of times more, and it's something that the council may want to consider looking at. Likely not to happen this year because we've got a lot already scheduled for the remainder of this year, but I would expect next year that would be something that could be discussed. So the other item that I had data on that I wanted to share was crime. Crime, we get a crime report that's accessible to the public from the FBI in the fall of every year that summarizes the data or presents the data for all reporting entities throughout the country for the previous year. So in the fall of 2020, we had access to the 2019 data, and they categorize crime in several categories. You have broad categories: violent and property crime. So what's a violent crime? Murder is a violent crime. Non-negligent manslaughter is a violent crime. Rape is obviously a violent crime. Robbery, which is somebody taking property away from you in your presence. So somebody comes up to you and says, "Give me your wallet and your watch," and you give it to him. Maybe because he has a knife, maybe because he's just part of a larger group of people and they're not displaying any weapons, but you feel threatened. That's what robbery is. If it happens in your home and you're present, it's robbery as well. Aggravated assault, obviously, somebody hits you or assaults you. That's a violent crime. A property crime is burglary. So that's if somebody enters your home with the intent to take something and you're not there. And larceny is when they remove something, like they take a bicycle off your property. They haven't entered your home, but they just take something that's yours and remove it from you. And then arson, if there are no people involved in terms of injury, that is considered a property crime. I tried to normalize, to have a unified number to combine violent and property crimes. And the way I chose to do it was to look at the ratio in a given year of property crimes to violent crimes. So if there were, let's say there was one rape in Highland and 10 property crimes, then if I wanted to do a number, I would say, okay, the violent crime is worth 10 property crimes. So it would have a unit count of 10, and then the property crimes would have a unit count of 1. And for that year, you would have a crime count of 20. Now, as it turns out, depending on the year, the ratio between property crimes and violent crimes is like 5.5 to 7.5. There's also a cost way to look at crime, and costs can be both tangible and intangible. For the numbers I'm showing, I include both. Tangible costs include, medical bills or replacement costs, any costs that the victim has to incur, and then costs related to the justice system, court costs, judges, attorneys, resident experts, if they're called to testify, that type of thing. So an intangible costs would include the opportunity cost for society because the criminal chose to be a criminal instead of doing something productive. Pain and suffering, decreased quality of life, psychological distress. This would be if you were the victim of an aggravated assault and had injuries that just did not, you just couldn't cover 100% from the rest of your life. So maybe it could be your head got banged and your mental capacity was reduced. It could be that you have PTSD. Those are not necessarily tangible, but you can come up with a number. And so I looked at a study that was done in 2008 and used data from that. And I looked at some other studies, and I used data from them to come up with, here are the costs that are correlated with the crimes that the FBI reports, and then came up with a number, a per capita number for cities in terms of measuring crime, and the states and the country as a whole. So if we look at Utah and say, what are the top 25 safest cities, we can say relative to violent crime, what's the safest city? And Alpine and Highland, we share the same police. So when we report our stats to the FBI, it's from Lone Peak, not Highland or Alpine. And for Highland, in 2019, we had a 0.13 rate of violent crime per thousand. So that means between the two cities, we have roughly 30,000 people. That means 30 times 0.13 is what? So maybe we have 3 incidences of violent crime. I am surprised when I look at the numbers for Highland specifically and say there are this many rapes or this many aggravated assaults. It's really, even though we're the safest in the state, it's still disheartening. So for me, the only answer is 0 on violent crime. But in relative terms, for cities over 10,000, we are the safest place to be in Utah for violent crime. Our nearest neighbor is, I'm looking here, gotta look down on my glasses, American Fork, and that has about 0.42. So we're about 3 times safer than American Fork in terms of violent crime. And our next closest neighbor is Lehigh, and they're over 1. So we are roughly 8 times safer than Lehigh. With respect to property crime, I think our number is about 2 per 1,000. The next closest neighbor is Lehigh. They're about 10. Wait, where's American Fork? Actually, American Fork did not make the top 25. So our nearest neighbor in the top 25 is Lehigh, and they're 10. So we're about 5 times safer than Lehigh from a property crime perspective. If you combine them, you can see we're again the lowest. If you do cost, we're again the lowest. If you, including both tangible and intangible costs, it cost our residents about $43 a person. Crime cost is $43 a person. In Lehigh, that's over 200. And in American Fork, it's about 160 something. So again, we're substantially safer than everyone else. You do see the dotted line on the chart that represents the Utah average across the state. So anybody that's in the top 25 is significantly below the average, and we're just significantly below even the top 25. Now, if we do year-over-year comparisons, Highland versus Utah versus U.S., you can see for violent crimes, Highland's a really great place to live. Property crimes, the same thing. If we look at combined crimes, again, the same thing. And cost of crime, it looks like even for Highland, there's a slight downward trend. I must confess that the numbers that I'm using are for any given year, the actual dollars for the year. So I don't do an inflation adjusted number to normalize it across the whole 10 years. So I would expect if crime stayed level, that over time the cost of crime would go up on how I'm showing it to you, because I do not remove inflation as a factor. So in spite of that, you can see there is a downward trend over the last 10, 11 years in Highland on cost of crime. So that means our crime is going down faster than inflation. So that's the data that I had to share with the people who were present. There was a question that came up, and I'm going to generalize it. It was about a specific issue, but it was, how do I influence council on a decision? And my counsel is, the best way to influence council members is to talk to them. Call them up, ask to meet with them. If you can't meet with them in person, I would talk to them on the phone. Otherwise, texting or email are good. They're just not quite as interactive. And I think you often get a lot more information shared, and you get a broader sense of what the problem is from all sides of the equation. Often when we come to council about something that is seemingly obvious to us, we just haven't considered other factors that council members need to consider, because it's not just about an individual or a few homes, it's about the whole city. So they just have to look at it from multiple perspectives. And so I think you get a better sense of that by talking with them. One of the least effective ways to influence the decision is the 3 minutes that we allow people to speak about any issue at city council. That is actually a good place to make people aware of a problem. But if you're trying to influence a decision one way or the other, that time at the front end of the meeting is not designed to have a dialogue with council or staff. It's a means of creating awareness, and it's a good way to do that. But you'll need to follow up either with staff or council members to start working an issue. So if you do come to council meetings and you're irate about something or just curious, just be aware, if we allowed everyone to have a conversation until something was resolved in the meeting, we would actually sometimes never get to our agenda items, the things that we need to do to pass to move the ball forward on road projects or developments or other issues that the council is responsible for making happen. So when you want to do the influencing, you do that outside of the council meeting. Create awareness in council meetings, but try and influence decisions outside of them. You're going to have a much better outcome if you take that approach. All right, have a great week. If you have any questions about what I shared, please feel free to ask. I will post a link to this presentation in the description on the YouTube description for this channel, and I'll also put it in on my Facebook mayor page as well. All right. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Call me, 801-318-7141. That's my mobile number. Or email me, mayor@highlandcity.org. I tend to respond to everything. Occasionally,